think I'm ready to get started. Fun evening last night. The reception was outstanding. The one thing we know is that librarians can network and drink at the same time. And as you recall, when we adjourned yesterday, I said that we could continue our conversations over the reception time. We did. I frankly got a lot out of talking to some folks. A couple of things. First of all, where's the it in ethics? I think a number of speakers yesterday, and certainly many of you, were talking about perhaps a more narrow focus to our discussions, perhaps in the future. And this afternoon, there's going to be a free-for-all panel discussion. Hope Olson is going to moderate 4 speakers who will only hold the floor for about 5-10 minutes, and then it'll be open for discussion, including perhaps where the focus for future conferences in terms of IOEthics should be. One area, for example, that I was very interested in learning more about last night were from the archivists. They're all grouped right here. And so the whole issue of provenance and privacy. And my question was, of course, if you're looking at provenance and you're looking at original letters and individuals, readers are making marginal notations to those letters, obviously you can't censor that. But when you digitize that and make it broadly available, what ethical considerations are there. And there are others, there are many other issues. Another one that, frankly, I was astonished by, that did not arise, has to do with the current debate and urgency coming out of the Committee on Education of ALA and the 11 recommendations they had made, one of which is that 50% of LIS faculty be trained in LIS. Well, we're talking about the voices that are behind the ethical issues. That says a lot too. So those are my particular interests. Are there any questions before I introduce our keynote speaker of what's going to happen today? You have the program. Talk about the panel discussion. Did I leave anything out, Hope? All right, we are very fortunate to have as a keynote speaker, and I hope I get this name right, Jose Augusto Chavez Guimaraes, who is a senior professor at São Paulo State University in Manila, Brazil. He holds a PhD in Communication Sciences, a Master's of Communication Sciences, a BA in Librarianship, and a BA in Law. He has wide experience in lecturing and research in the area of information science, with an emphasis on information organization, working mainly on some of the following topics: document analysis, librarianship, training and professional performance in information organization, and legal documentation. His lectures have taken him to Argentina, Belgium, Canada, Chile, Cuba, Spain, France, England, Mexico, Paraguay, Portugal, Switzerland, and Uruguay. You do get around. And, of course, they're lucky. Jose is former president of the Brazilian Association of Law Education, former president of the Ibero-American Association of Library and Information Education and Research, and is president of the EDIBCIC, of the International Society of Knowledge Organization Brazilian chapter. Now, I did not know what the EDIBCIC was, so I looked it up, and it's an interesting organization. It's a Latin American and Caribbean-based association that convenes to establish an exchange of ideas, experiences, and resources between information science, documentation, and librarianship. Please give a warm welcome to Jose.
Well, good morning, and first of all, I'd like to thank the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee for the invitation, as well as I would like to congratulate the Information Organization Research Group for the initiative of promoting such an outstanding event especially considering the lack of discussion spaces we have specifically in this area. So I do hope that this event can be a starting point for some other events, and I do trust that this will be a very important space for those discussions. In fact, today I would like much more to share with you some research results of some investigations we have been carried out in my university in our research group since 2003 about the ethical matters in knowledge organization. And I would say that the starting point of all this research interest was the ISCO Congress 2002 in Granada, where one of the subjects of the event was specifically the ethical questions. And there were at that event a very, very interesting roundtable on ethics in information organization. And exactly at that time, we took contact with the publications of Claire Bechtel as well as with the book of Hope Olson, Power to Name. And since then, me, as well as my dear fellow Juan Carlos Fernandez Molina from the University of Granada, we have started a research line in this area. Today I would like to present 3 points. One first point are trying to draw up some theoretical marks in knowledge, organization, and representation ethics. Considering we are now in a space, an academic space, to discuss this subject, I think it is important perhaps to mark some theoretical guidelines, some theoretical articles and books that may furnish important information for our research. In a second moment, I would like to present our research we have carried out during the last 3 years, and we have presented part of those results in the last ISCO Congress in Montreal last year, about the knowledge organization and representation, ethical values and problems, based on an analysis of the library and information science literature during 1 decade. And based on those 2 approaches, my idea is trying to present a preliminary proposal of categorization of knowledge organization and representation values as a start point for a future and deeper reflection in this subject. When we talk about values in knowledge, organization, and representation, we have first to consider 2 points. First, the first element, knowledge, organization, and representation as a multidisciplinary scientific branch devoted to the development of procedures, tools, and products to establish the mediation between the production and the use of information. I do believe, and yesterday that was one of the questions discussed, that knowledge organization and representation, even nowadays with all the folksonomies, with all the experiences of someone tagging his own information, I do believe that knowledge organization keeps its mediation characteristics. The other point is the ethical dimension. Ethics, considered while a study of the moral aspects of human behavior in society. It means we are approaching ethics while a reflection on the moral situations. And in this sense, it appears the ethical values and then the ethical problems, which is specifically the object of our investigation. The ethical values while a set of beliefs which contributes to reach the self and social welfare, and in professional areas they result from specific knowledge as well as from the application of such knowledge, and as a consequence, the ethical problems that we, in a simple way, can conceive as the facts occurred when some ethical values are denied, forgotten, or simply not observed. The question of ethics in the library and information science branch has been studied mostly since the 90s of the last century. And in this sense, in the international literature, we can point some authors who have devoted their attentions to the study of library professional ethics. In France, Dominique Arrault and Michel Leblanc. In the United States, Sanford Berman, Freilich. We have also Michael Borman, Köhler, Mintz. In Spain, Margarita Pérez Pulido, the University of Extremadura, and also Pemberton, just to mark some of those researchers in the 90s on general ethical questions in the library professions. But what we have noticed in those articles and in those books is that the emphasis in the ethical questions is much more centered in ethical matters in reference services, ethical matters in library administration, and as a consequence in collection development, and ethical questions in a day-by-day professional relationship, but not specifically in knowledge, organization, and representation. Considering that situation, and mostly motivated by the questions studied by Clark-Bechtel and Hope Olson, we started the project, the research project, Ethical Questions in the Subject Treatment of Information in 2003. And this project is sponsored by the Brazilian National Research Council. And since then, we have produced some dissertations, and we have some PhD thesis in course. I specifically would like to sign out the PhD of Fábio Pinho, which discusses the ethical aspects of the euphemism as a way to hide prejudices in knowledge organization. So, we aim to identify a set of theoretical marks which contribute to the study of knowledge organization and representation ethic, to present a preliminary landscape of ethical values, and as a consequence, problems which can cause impact in knowledge organization and representation activities, and as a consequence, to furnish a preliminary systematization of ethical values and problems in knowledge organization and representation. In terms of theoretical background, I would like to point out those authors which I particularly believe that they deeply contribute to a theoretical reflection on ethical matters in knowledge organization and representation. The concept of cultural warrant and cultural hospitality of Clark-Bechtel, the concept of transcultural ethics of mediation from Professor Antonio Garcia Gutierrez from the University of Seville, Spain, the questions on multilingualism in knowledge organization pointed out by Michel Hudon from Canada, the discussions on the knowledge domains presented by Talefsin, the questions of prejudices pointed out by Sanford Berman in the 70s, the content of the statement power to name presented by Hope also, the concept of cataloging collaboration postulated by Sheila Baer, the questions on professional responsibility pointed out by Martinus van der Waal from South Africa, as well as Ingetraud Dahlberg from Germany, as well as an approach on levels of ethical commitments that I have proposed in the 2000. The first concept that is especially important for approaching the questions on ethical values and ethical problems is the concept of cultural warrant proposed by Clark Bechtel, when in two articles Bechtel shows a movement from a traditional concept of literary warrant and the importance of respecting a concept of cultural warrant, especially in multicultural societies. And as a consequence, a movement from a traditional notational hospitality in classification systems to a broader concept of cultural hospitalities. In those articles, under our reading, we would point out that it's important to recognize the complexity of relations between individuals and their cultures. An individual acts as a surrogate of his cultural environment. A second approach that in many senses deeply agrees with the approach of Clark Bechtel is what proposes Antonio Garcia Gutierrez when he announces the concepts of transcultural ethics of mediation. In this sense, he thinks that the knowledge organization and representation systems can be considered as cultural mediation tools, which agrees with the concept of cultural warrant of Clark Bechtel in multicultural environment. He also points out the need of an intercultural dialogue by means of a compatibility. And in the books of Garcia Gutierrez, he builds a new concept of interactive epistemography. He conceives the indexing languages as a kind of epistemography, so the record of an episteme, which acts in an iterative basis. And in this sense, he thinks that knowledge organization and representation occurs in interactive and dialogical environments by means of the adoption of transcultural and consensual categories. Yesterday, one of the discussions was on the way that every user receives the information, the meaning that information of the label, of the tag which is put in the information, the effects of it in every user considering his cultural environment. In this sense, that Garcia Gutierrez proposes the transculturality and the consensual dimension of those categories. In order to exemplify this situation about how different users understand a label, a tag, a subject, label, subject, tag, considering his culture. Some years ago, the Brazilian government, during the annual populational census, decided to ask to every Brazilian citizen how he or she named his color and his race. And it was very interesting because it was observed a wide range of 95 terms for representing people with both Africa and Indo-European origins. We had examples like black, Negro, brown, deep brunette. I suppose deep brunette. One of the expressions was that just to show how is the perception of the tag color or the tag race considering the cultural environment of each one. In Canada, in the University of Montreal, Michel Hudon, in the 90s, wrote some very, very interesting articles on the problem of multilingualism in indexing languages. Her specific preoccupation was the question of translating indexing languages, specifically considering the situation of the Quebec province, bilingual environment. And at that, in those articles, Michel Hudon said that we cannot consider language translation as a simple adaptation of different languages, because each term in its original language is connected to a cultural set of values. So, translating is much more than passing to another language, because language is cultural. And she also said that each term in one certain language, it brings with him some idiosyncratic unities, and that's the reason that I reminded that old Italian speech which said traduttore traditore, translator, betrayer. And some examples of this specific situation, this peculiarity on translating is, for instance, in the relation between the term father-in-law in English and the translation in French, beau-père, beautiful father. One father is in law and the other is beautiful. We have some idiosyncratic difference here. Another translation, this one is very, very funny, is between the same word in Spanish and in Portuguese. Esquisito and esquisito. Esquisito in Spanish, I suppose there is the word exquisite in English. It means something very, very good, isn't it? If I say that a certain food is exquisite, it's wonderful, it's terrific. In Portuguese, it's exactly the opposite. When something is exquisite, it's very bad, it's very strange. If I say that a food is exquisite, certainly this food stinks. It's not good to be eaten. So we can say the way that every culture appropriates a term, since both of them are Romance languages, and the way that their cultural environments, the different meanings that those environments give to those terms. Like the expression baroque in Spanish, it sometimes has a very good sense, and in Portuguese has a very bad sense. Another example is the expression America. The meaning of America in United States, it refers to a country. In Latin America, it refers to a continent. So that's I was talking about that with Claire yesterday. So the way that different cultures receive those terms. Another very, very interesting article on ethical question was written by Tellefsen. I suppose they're Danish. Danish. It was published in Knowledge Organization, and they talk about the knowledge domain, the need of the indexer respect the knowledge domain. We are very accustomed to talk about respecting the user context. That's okay. But Tellefsen also point out that we do need to respect the knowledge domain of the record, of the information, because every domain has its own way to produce, to systematize, and to diffuse knowledge. In this sense, there is the need of the indexing being committed to the structure and the reasoning of the represented knowledge area. How this knowledge area functions? How does it work? How is the development of this area? Sanford Berman, in 1971, published his book Prejudice and Antipathies. And at that time, Berman pointed out the danger, the real danger, of prejudices in knowledge organization and representation. I say danger because most of those prejudices are not explicit. Perhaps that's the reason that my student Fabio is deeply concerned on the euphemisms, especially nowadays when we talk about the politically correct. The politically correct has certainly a wonderful task, but in a certain way, the politically correct hides, transforms, hides the prejudice. It's not the question that they do not exist anymore. They are hidden under some politically correct terms. Prejudice in knowledge organization and representation can occur by means of the ideological charge contained in the elected terms, as well as in the relations established among them. I remember an example that was given to me, to my dear fellow Maria José Lopez Huertas, the ISCO president, of an indexing language which uses the following relation. Siamese twins, sea monsters. That's complicated. Prejudices in knowledge organization and representation are the main cause of the user's lack of trust in information retrieval system. That's my main preoccupation. Because when a certain user does not see himself reflected in the text, in the labels of a certain catalog, of a certain information system, he feels outside of the library, outside of the scene, of the system. And he cannot, perhaps he will not come anymore. So that's one of the things that we need to be very, very preoccupied. Siegel in Germany in 2004 in the ISCO German chapter Congress, there was a session on ethics in knowledge organization and representation. And at that time, Alexander Siegel said that every professional action of a knowledge organizer should make it easier for human knowledge workers to intellectually access assertions and related research, what is known, about a sought subject, such that they are better able to fulfill the information needs and tasks. And in that specific work, he pointed out some problems in this branch: misindexing, keyword spamming, false metadata representation with the aim of attracting traffic from internet visitors. We do know that the most tagged, the most represented words in internet are Bible and sex, for obvious reasons. Or exclusion, choice of inappropriate, culturally, politically, or religiously biased terminology, and labeling, categorization. Another approach comes from Hope Olson. And I would repeat what I said in Montreal last year, because when I had the opportunity to read Hope's book, The Power to Name, lots of things changed in my mind. Because until that time, I was preoccupied with the well-doing in our area, how to establish some good situations in my professional areas. But at that moment, in the Book of Hope, when she said that the cataloging, the indexer, while labeling, while establishing a terminology for a certain content, has a huge power in his hand, and he needs to be conscious of this power in order to try to impart it in the moment of representing. I noticed that that was something very important to be considered. And I think that the power to name is something we need to discuss, to deeply discuss in our library and information science school, in order to avoid the, perhaps I would say, naive conception that indexing is simply a technical activity of translating a content to an indexing language. It's much, much, much more than it. Martinus van der Waart from South Africa, as well as Ingetal Dalberg from Germany, refers to professional responsibility in terms of the user's damage caused by biased or incorrect knowledge, organization, and representation. Here we have also a juridical dimension of this situation, in situations that professionals can be sued by those biased or incorrect representation, since they can cause damage to the user. And specifically Dalberg shows that the traditional concept of precision that we usually recognize as an information retrieval measure is much more than it. It's in fact a value, because it's something we are looking for all the time for doing a good job while indexing and while cataloging. Sheila Bair was an author which brings all this discussion to the cataloging situation, and specifically to the descriptive cataloging, not only to knowledge, organization, and representation in terms of subject. And she points out the need of sharing information, representation in information systems. Yesterday, when Janet told us about cataloging collaboration, I remind this article of Sheila Bair, because Sheila Bair says the importance of this collaboration as an ethical commitment in order to improve the possibilities of information retrieval by different users. We talk a lot about inclusion, about social inclusion, about user inclusion, and I do believe that this is a very important way for the user inclusion in the system. And in 2000, in an article, a general article on ethical questions in library information science, I started to point out some questions on knowledge organization. And at that time, I proposed 5 dimensions of ethical commitment in library information science. One first commitment, and I would say the most important one, with the user. I mean, the user context, the user needs, and so on. A second commitment with the information, and it agrees a lot with the conception of telepsin and telepsin. It means a commitment with the content of the record, a commitment of the way of producing the this content. The third level of commitment would be the professional commitment with the organization purpose, the library purpose, and so on. When we talk about industrial documentation center, for instance, which have a specific purpose, all those questions need to be considered. The fourth level of commitment is a commitment with the profession, because we know that a real ethical attitude, it contributes to improving the image of the profession as a whole in society. And last but not least, a commitment of the professional with himself, with his beliefs, with his convictions, with his cultural environment. The applied part of the research was developed in a corpus of 6 journals: JASIS, Journal of Documentation, Cataloging and Classification Quarterly, the Indexer, Knowledge Organization, and Ethics and Information Technologies. You can see that we have 2 different groups. One group much more devoted to general information, and another group much more, 3 groups. Another group devoted to knowledge organization and representation, and ethics and information technology as a representative of the ethical approach. The period analyzed was 1995 to 2004. And the method was the identification of selected items in specific areas of the articles. I mean title, subtitle, abstract, keywords, and titles of the sections in 2 terminological domains. 2 terminological domains, considering we were dealing with 2 different scopes of periodicals. In the ethical domain, the terms ethics, ethical, ethos, deontology, values, conduct, and moral. And in the knowledge organization and representation domain, the terms knowledge organization, knowledge representation, indexing, classification, subject cataloging, subject analysis, content analysis, abstracting, thesaurus, subject headings. In total, 2,206 articles were analyzed, and in those articles we could get only 23 articles in total, referring in a certain way to ethical matters in knowledge organization. In terms of discussion of the results, what we have noticed? We have noticed that the ethical values in those articles can be grouped in 3 different spheres. A first sphere, it's related to the superior values which must guide all the informational activities. What were the values explicited in those articles? Respect to privacy, authorship, copyright, accessibility, freedom, safety, equity, diversity, and risk minimization. As you can see, those values can be applied not only in knowledge organization, but in all the information area itself. Values previously recognized as professional requirements once they are essential to the information professional action. I mean, most of those values are originally written in the Library and Archival Code of Ethics. Competence, skill, efficiency, flexibility, reliability, professional recognition, up-to-dating, autonomy, power, awareness, and cooperation. And then, values previously considered as mere information retrieval measures, but recognized today as part of the axiological universe, of the axiological core of knowledge, organization, and representation. Precision, recall, cultural warrant, exhaustivity, consistency, usability, hospitality. 5 fundamental values correspond together to 57% of the whole analyzed universe, which are privacy, precision, cultural warrant, authorship, copyright, and exhaustivity. In all the analyzed articles, we could observe, and this is a question that I present to you because in fact it's a doubt that I do have. It seems that the access to information could be considered a knowledge organization and representation categorical imperative under the Kantian theory, because it can be considered one ultimate commandment of reason or imperative from which all duties and obligations derive. Because any proposition that declares a certain action or inaction to be necessary, and it's based only on something that's an end in itself. I tend to believe that the access to information can be considered our categorical imperative in knowledge organization and representation because it is an end in itself. I think that nobody would deny the importance of the access of information. Another question is to discuss what would be the conditions of this access, but the access as a principle, I tend to believe that it's an imperative, a categorical imperative. In terms of ethical problems, what was the range of problems observed in this investigation, this research? Problems which are not specific of the knowledge organization representation activity context, but only present in the world today, such as digital segregation, pornography, discharge of electronic garbage, professional being replaced by technology, violence. I would say that there is a tangential movement of those values in the knowledge organization environment, but they do not belong specifically to this environment. In problems which are directly related to knowledge organization or representation professional activities, such as surveillance, censorship, lack of cultural warrant, negligence. Here we can see in what measure the problems denote a deny of values. We have cultural warrant as a value and lack of cultural warrant as a problem. Negligence, informational directness, professional inefficiency, misrepresentation, racism, ambiguity, marginalization, impartiality or neutrality belief, idiosyncrasy, inaccessibility to information, biased terminology, and inadequate translation. In this group of problems, quite differently from the group of values, we notice a great dispersion. In the group of values, we notice 4 values representing 57% of the whole group. Here, we note a great dispersion problem, and in only the problems of surveillance showed a significant incidence itself, but not so significant, 12%, compared with the values. Those are the many cited articles, the mainly references in those 23 analyzed articles. I would say that it confirms in what measure those authors can also be considered as theoretical marks on knowledge organization representation values discussion. And considering all this situation, and also considering that ISCO has a classification scheme, especially devoted to knowledge organization subjects, and even knowing that it's not used, commonly used in libraries, I tried to insert a preliminary proposal of categorization in the universe of the classification scheme of ISCO, just to allow a wider approach of the area. So, the classification scheme of ISCO has a specific class 9.2, which is devoted to social and political questions on knowledge organization. But unfortunately, it has no divisions, very differently from other notations as the in the indexing languages and some other. And considering all this study, I tried to propose a preliminary categorization. And I would name ethical questions in knowledge, organization, and representation, or perhaps you could say moral questions, depending on the approach. But the first subdivision would be ethical commitments in knowledge organization. Commitment to the user, commitment to the information content, and commitment to the institution. The second group, ethical values in knowledge, organization, and representation. Transculturality of mediation. In this sense, we have cultural warrant, cultural hospitality, respect to the knowledge domains. Then, trust in representation. We have impartiality, precision, exhaustivity, consistency, literary warrant, up-to-date, cooperation. And I would leave a group of notation vacant, because certainly all those values and those problems are growing and are appearing day by day. And as a last notation in this division, I would propose meta-values in knowledge organization, considering the results. Privacy, freedom of expression, access to information, safety, respect to diversity, intellectual property or copyright. You can see that access to information is in the same level of privacy, freedom, safety, and so on. But I do believe that access to information is in an upper position than the other ones. And then the ethical problems in knowledge organization and representation. The first division, bias, literality in translation, the causes of bias. Literality in translation, reductionism, here including dichotomical categorizations, generalization, omissions, proselytism. Then imprecision, incorrection, and inconsistencies. Here included adulteration, deturpation, partiality, alienation, lack of clarity, inaccessibility. Then prejudices and idiosyncrasies. Then belief in the neutrality of knowledge organization representation, process, products, and tools, because I believe that the knowledge organization representation area could be theoretically represented by a triangle in which ambit, in which environment interact a set of procedures, a set of products, result of the application of those procedures, and a set of tools which are means to read those products. Belief in the universalism of knowledge organization and representation process, products and tools, lack of commitment and social responsibility, inefficiency, negligence, censorship, surveillance, information, monitoring, and leading. I would repeat that this is a very, very preliminary proposal, just in order to give a start point for a reflection on what would be the values, the inherent values and problems in knowledge organization, ethical values and problems in knowledge organization and representation. Some conclusions. The prevailing values and the problems derived from them partially reveal two complementary dimensions: respect to diversity and specificity warranty, which confirms the relevance of the theoretical principles put forward by Udon, Bechtel, and Garcia Gutierrez, in such a way that knowledge organization and representation tools can guarantee the respect to the cultural dimension of knowledge representation. Knowledge organization and representation education. As a professor, I do need to talk about those questions because it's my day-by-day situation. Needs to focus not only content issues, but also social and consequently ethical issues. And now I remember the speech of Janet in this sense. Since knowledge organization and representation deals with making information accessible to every and all kind of user of a specific information system, consequentially, violations to the mentioned ethical principles may lead the user to the abandon that system as a whole, by considering it not viable nor reliable for not having met his or her needs, not respected his or her moral rights and values. Knowledge organization and representation research needs further studies investigating violation of ethical values and also analyzing the axiological core of the area in order to searching for sound foundation of its epistemological core, especially nowadays when those ethical matters occur not only in traditional information contests as libraries, but also in digital information environments as databases in which it assumes a significantly more complex dimension. It's important to face the ethical dimension of knowledge organization and representation by means of an axiological approach. I do believe that it's important first an axiological reflection to then dealing with a deontological dimension. I believe that the deontological dimension of the area is a consequence of an axiological reflection. I try not to consider the code of ethics as juridical rules, but I tend to consider them as a result of a set of values collectively constructed by the professionals. In this sense, the deontological dimension of the area, mainly its codes of ethics, emerge as a result of a set of values established by the professional category as a whole, and not as a simple and mandatory list of impersonal rules. Thank you very much.
We'll take questions. Jose has asked me to please ask you to pose your questions slowly and to enunciate, so I don't have to translate, because my translations are going to be awful. So, with that, questions, please.
I do apologize because my understanding of spoken English is not very good, so I do appreciate if you make your questions very slowly.
This is not known to be a quiet group.
Well, I'll ask, you say this is your preliminary proposal and that you're working on things. When and where are you planning to publish this proposal?
Wow. It's very nice hearing that from you. It's very nice hearing that from you, Janet. In fact, I'm trying to verify. I would say that some of the notations, some of them are still overlapped. I need to refine their order. But my idea is much more to contribute not specifically to ISCO, but to perhaps a further reflection on what are the set of values in our area.
Could you go back to your taxonomy right before you talk about bias?
Okay.
I want to make sure I understand.
So the problems.
Yeah.
Here?
Alright. So, right before. One more.
More? Before?
Yeah.
Values.
Yeah, there we go, values. I thought I heard something about part. Partial?
Impartiality.
Impartiality. Oh, okay. I thought you were setting up an ethical problem of covering particular things and not others. So excluding others by not naming.
Yes.
Is that part of this
Yes.
as well?
Yeah.
Could you give me an example where we would know that?
Okay. For instance, if you have a document where you have two positions discussed, and you represent in a much more detailed way. I mean, two positions in the same level, and you represent, because of your own beliefs, one of these positions in a more detailed way than the other one, I don't know, perhaps I would consider it partiality. Or if you do not represent the other one.
And we would know because other people had judged it present.
Maybe, or maybe because of when you let your own idiosyncrasy interfere, deeply interfere. The problem of the own idiosyncrasies it's a very tough question, and I do believe that it's important that each indexer recognize that he is a human being and he is a subject of idiosyncrasies and beliefs. Because since the moment that one recognizes that he is not impartial, he will be much more careful when representing information, and he's trying to avoid letting those idiosyncrasies interfere in his representation. I'm not saying that it's not interfering, but it will be a tentative to avoid.
Thank you. Very good presentation.
Thank you very much.
I just have a question about your categorical imperative, your continuation of access to information. Do you make a difference between access and accessibility when you apply that notion?
In fact, I haven't thought in more details about that. But I don't know if I understand the coverage of those words in English. But accessibility is the possibility of access, is that the capability.
Yeah, it's more language, but what I think I make a difference between having access to a concept does not mean I have accessibility and usability of the information itself. Because I can be misled if I have access to the word or to the metadata. It doesn't mean that I can find actually the information that I need. So accessibility, if I read something in Latin or I have access to the information, but I simply cannot understand it, use it, or value it. So it's not accessible for me. But it's just a notion that I think is...
No, but that's a very important question. So under your point of view, the concept of accessibility would be, in fact, broader than access.
Yeah.
Actually,
benefit to use it that actually I find looking for. Access to information is very broad. And I can have access to all the information, but if I don't understand the language, then I don't have accessibility to the content itself.
But yes, that's important what you're pointing out. But I would say that if we are talking about categorical imperative, isn't it necessary to be something very broad to pursue?
Yeah, you defined it well when you said there are certain limitations because privacy, I cannot have access to other people, so it can be override in the sense that I can limit access to information based on government secrets or my private life, if there is something like that. So I think it's a good categorical imperative. I was just thinking, access limits. Accessibility.
I think you're right.
That I can have.
I think you're right. Yes.
But it's something I would
yes,
like to
reason.
Yes,
I think for reason, because it's a capability, it's a possibility. Yes. Thank you very much.
No, thank you for putting that up there.
Yes, back here.
First, thank you. It's very interesting. And this is more of a comment. I think it's very valuable how you put surveillance, for example, in this scheme. Because usually when we're looking at surveillance and issues related to surveillance and we search for them, it's under some active politics or government. And to take that into a facet of knowledge organization, I think is very valuable. So.
Yes, the question of surveillance, it appeared much more, it occurred much more in the journal Ethics and Information Technology, because it grew a lot with development of the information technologies and information communication technologies. But and now I remember your very interesting communication yesterday, and when I say that accessibility to information, and I do appreciate this suggestion, can be considered a categorical imperative itself, but not the way it occurs, the way information will be accessible. Because when we translate this situation to a context like the one you presented yesterday, the conditions to make this information accessible are quite different than other situations.
Okay, thank